from different locations, locally, and that have traveled to be here. I know it means a lot to Scott, and it means a lot to me because there's a lot of old shipmates here, now retired, that have been through this process and active duty still. And it's good to see you all, and I'm glad you're here to share in Scott's day. And what a huge day this is. It's great to be here with many familiar faces of friends and family to celebrate the career of one of the best ordnancemen I have had the pleasure of working side by side with. Scott, I can't express how much it humbles me that you asked me to speak today on what is one of the most significant days in your career. Well, I'm not going to say he asked, but he pretty much told me. He said, "You're going to be my guest speaker." So when he said that, I think to myself, you're expected to get up here and say good things about the individual retiring, highlight their career, maybe tell a joke or two, but I really don't have any jokes. But the big thing is not to be really boring, and I want to do my best to not do that. So when Scott asked me to do this, I immediately thought to myself, what in the world am I going to say? What am I going to talk about? And I thought, man, I need to make something up, and I really need to make it good. But to be honest, I knew right away exactly what I wanted to say. But keeping it timely, while at the same time really capturing what Lieutenant Commander Kessler has done in his career, that was my real challenge. Scott's career is one that has spanned 29 years, 14 commands, and 8 deployments. Some of those commands are since gone and have been decommissioned, and he is following in their footsteps. He's received many awards and commendations. He was selected as the Aviation Ordnanceman of the Year in the year 2000. He's worn the anchors as a Chief Petty Officer and gained commission as a Limited Duty Officer. All key milestones in a very successful career that have led to his sitting in that chair today. Obviously, the words used to sum up a career just can't portray exactly what those facts and figures reflect. And I'm not going to stand here today and detail all of his 29 years of service, but I will share with you one of the key time frames of his career that I was fortunate enough to serve with him while we were stationed together on board the John C. Stennis, which there are quite a few people in the crowd today that were also there. That's where I was the air gunner, or the G1 division officer, and he was my flight deck and leading chief petty officer. And just so you know, that was one page, and I've only got 5 more left, so we're good. So at this time, the ship was off the coast of California conducting carrier qualifications. And for those not familiar, carrier qualifications are just that. It's days and nights, hours upon hours, of pilots taking off from and landing on the carrier. Just continuous cycles of takeoffs and landings. We were underway for a few days already and finished up a late night of flying. As the sun rose the following morning, everything we had planned, everything we had scheduled from that day forward became null and void. Because this particular morning was September 11th, 2001. I know I don't have to describe the events of that day, because I believe that is one of the moments in time we all remember where we were, what we were doing, and how things transpired in our lives in the days that followed. For me, that morning started as a matter of routine, and at approximately 07:30, an announcement by our ship CO, Captain Gallagher, was made about the events in New York and Washington and Pennsylvania, and that a lot was unknown. But he was confident that there was more to follow, and that our world as we knew it was changing before our eyes. So as the events of that day unfolded and the information flowed, our mission went from conducting carrier qualifications to flying actual missions off the U.S. West Coast. We faced many challenges with this tasking of flight missions. We had some aircraft, obviously, because we're doing carrier quals, we had to have planes, but there was no ordnance to speak of. Our ordnance on-load wasn't scheduled until November, and here we are in September. We did have some 20mm on board for the aircraft gun for the F-18, and we did have a couple missiles, and that was it. That was the extent of our inventory for the task that immediately faced us. Our CAG was in Fallon, Nevada. They were out there doing training, and they had some live missiles pre-positioned for that training. But what we had to do is we made arrangements to get those missiles and a small batch of aircraft and a crew of personnel, which would be a mix of ordnance maintainers and upper-level leadership from all the squadrons, create this one detachment. But they weren't going to make it there right away, and we had a task to fly air patrol missions over U.S. airspace with whatever aircraft and ordnance we had available, and it wasn't much, but it was going to have to make do. The one thing missing, a very integral part, were the qualified ordnancemen to load and arm the planes before they leave the deck, because during carrier qualifications, there's no ordnance required or even allowed. So the ordnance personnel to support those aircraft, they're not out there. The only ordnance we have available are what's on the ship. Now, do we have experienced personnel in aircraft loading and arming? Yes, we did, Scott being one of them. But no one's certified on paper with current quals, because the qualifications to handle ordnance are renewed annually, and to the specific action you are performing, whether you're arming it, loading it, assembling it, testing it, you're certified for those specific work tasks. As a ship's company, we were only certified to handle it, stow it, assemble it, and test it. The squadron ordnance are the ones certified for loading and arming. But as I said, they weren't getting there anytime soon. I remember the ordnance handling officer, he mustered all the ordnance leadership in the hangar bay. We were all in a big group, he was at the front, and he asked who had squadron experience just in general. A few hands went up, he'd point them out and say, Chief, you take those 3 guys. He'd ask who has troubleshooting experience. A couple more hands would go up. You guys, go off to the side. And then myself, I'm a carrier ordnanceman from day one, although I went through loading school to expand my knowledge. Me and Scott together, as a matter of fact. The most operations I've seen as a sailor up to this point with F-18s was in this position as the air gunner. So taking that job necessitated a crash course in everything involved with the aircraft and its ordnance and safe flight deck operations. So we get our load teams built, we get some planes loaded, ready to fly. But we still don't have an arm-D-arm team, which is the team that pushes the buttons, turns the handles, and pulls the pins on the ordnance in the aircraft before it launches, making the ordnance ready to function if it's released. But we don't have a team, but Scott and I have a plan. Now we have our first aircraft coming to the CAD. Our ship CO is in the cockpit leading the way for this go. He was at the time one of the most seasoned pilots that we had on board. As the plane approaches the CAD, the deck handler stops it short and turns it over to the arm-D-arm leader. And like I said, we had a plan, and that arm-D-arm team leader was Chief Kessler. Standing at about the 1 o'clock position in relation to the aircraft. The pilot in the cockpit gives very distinct and visual cues of his awareness of what is going on, with evident head turns in the direction of the action. Now the control of the aircraft is passed to Chief Kessler, and the CO transitions his whole head and eyes from the deck handler to where Chief Kessler is standing. And now when he does this, all I can hear him saying in his head as his eyes hit Scott is, "What in the world?" He said, "That is my weapons flight deck, Chief, and he's getting ready to arm my bird." So the CO turns his head, and that's when Scott gives the arming signal. Gives the arming signal, the CO turns his head to the 9 o'clock position, and that's where he sees me coming in to arm his gun. And that's when I told you we had a plan. So once again, I can imagine the surprise when he sees his air gunner coming in to arm his bird. He watches as I go in to arm the plane, and as I run out after doing so. Needless to say, the launch went without a hitch. Now during this time, did we operate outside the boundaries of many of our ordinance and directives and policies? Probably all of them. Yes, we did. But we didn't do it lightly, or without understanding of exactly what lines we were coloring outside of. But at rare times, you were faced with factors that present some extremely difficult decisions. And our senior leadership made that decision based on the personnel we had to operate with. I know that then Chief Kessler's presence on that ship at that time weighed heavily in the decision to execute our mission with what and whom we had available. So with all this going on, we finally get our CAG planes, personnel, and the missiles on board. I went from being the air gunner to also being the CAG gunner. And because the CAG gunner actually stayed in Fallon. We only brought a small batch of planes. They had to finish the training syllabus so they could be ready to deploy. So then Chief Kessler, he quickly picked up the slack that created with me having to be the CAG gunner. And believe me, there was a lot of slack created with this situation. In addition to get some of our CAG planes from Fallon, plans were also being developed to execute our ordnance on load scheduled for November, done as soon as possible. So in the midst of building a squadron ordnance shop out of ship's company personnel, Getting what ordnance we did have ready to fly and defend our own airspace, we finalized our plan for the onload, which started on 13th September. Now, carrier loading ordnance at sea is a very large and dangerous evolution. You have two ships traveling 10 to 15 knots, about 150 to 180 feet apart, connected by cables. On these cables, the one ship is sending over tons of explosives, bombs, fuses, missiles, etc. Everything we need to kill the enemy. At the same time, on the back part of the ship, you have helos picking up loads of ordnance on a hook from the supply ship and flying over to the carrier and dropping it on the flight deck. I guess placing it would be a better term, because it isn't always a soft touchdown, but sometimes it's tough, a lot of times it's just right. It's not easy to fly a helo and pick up stuff from one ship, pitch it and roll it, and drop it on another, and do it softly. But so far, in all the years we've been doing it, nothing's exploded while we've been executing. So that's always a good thing. So as we're taking all this ordnance on, the ordnance personnel on the ship are working fervently to get this stuff put away down below, with this particular evolution being pressured by the need to get some of what we're taking on actually broken out and back up to the roof for continued operations. So we get all that complete, the onload's done, we get everything stowed down below, we get some missiles broke out, we break out some chaff and flare, get some more bullets, and we flew air patrol missions over the US West Coast for 2 additional weeks until we're finally allowed to pull in with the new plan of deploying 3 months early. We were scheduled to deploy in February of 2002, we deployed November 2001. This was a very dynamic and high-tempo time on board John C. Stennis, as well as every other location throughout our nation and the world. Every sailor had his part to play for those 2 weeks we protected our own airspace. The demand that was put on me individually was pretty intense. And if I didn't have Scott by my side to encourage me and push me and guide me in the right direction, I can honestly say I wouldn't have been able to deliver. He not only took care of the troops and kept them focused, he did that and more for me. And it is a time I will absolutely never forget. And I will be forever grateful for you being there during that time in my career. Now, there are many more moments and events I could share about this man during that tour, but I know you don't want to be here all day. But I will share with you just one more thing that shows the type of leader that Lieutenant Commander Kessler is. You'll see on my chest and on others up here and in the crowd, we have some personal awards. Some of mine I remember why I received them. Others, I'd probably have to read the citation. But there is one in particular that stands above the rest, and I will tell you why. I know, you might be thinking, this guy's here to talk about Scott, and all he's doing is talk about himself. Well, if you just bear with me for a minute, you'll see it's all about him. You see, when we get recommended for awards, our seniors make the recommendation, they draft and submit it for approval, or denial, depending on the action. Well, for the efforts during the days and after 9/11, I was awarded my 6th Navy Achievement Medal, which has also been my last since that time. Receiving it was a total surprise, as it should be, and not at all expected. Now I know, you're still saying, how is this about Scott? Well, I'm not sure if even Scott is aware that I know what I'm about to share with you. As I stated previously, I was his division officer, and he was my chief. So for all intents and purposes, he worked for me. But it was Chief Kessler who made the recommendation for me to receive that award. And it was Chief Kessler who drafted and submitted the input. Never in my career could I have fathomed that someone under my charge would recommend me for an award for a particular job that I did. I tell you this not to show you how well I performed for those 2 weeks. I tell you this as a statement and a testament to the way that Lieutenant Commander Kessler did business and took care of his people, including those he worked for, his entire career. Now, all of you here that know Scott know he can be quite boisterous and loud, but as loud as he sometimes tends to be, his actions have always spoken much louder than his voice ever has. So through the whole time I've been speaking, I've referred to Lieutenant Commander Kessler as that, of course, Lieutenant Commander, Chief Kessler when I was talking about his chief days, and Scott But what y'all may not know